My name is Erica Moy, and I work as a math coach in Essex Westford. Prior to being a coach there, I've been a math interventionist. And in addition to that, I work with all learners as a facilitator and have started by joining one of their cohort groups and attending some workshops. And so today we're really going to discuss and look at how to focus intervention work by using the high leverage concepts. Some of you may or may not be familiar with those. And hopefully when you leave today, you'll all have a little more information than you did before. Please stop me at any time if you have questions. And I did make sure I'm going to try to leave some time at the end so we can have questions as well then. But don't worry about stopping if you have something along the way. So to do some introductions, I'm going to actually stop sharing and then do something that I did with my first graders when I was teaching Remote Academy this spring. So I wanted to give you a little something that you could do with your students if it's something that you haven't done yet. And so for those of you who are back, if you can turn your video off, and I'm going to say something, and if it's something that you agree with or something that's true for you, you'll turn your camera back on. So it's a game called Just Like Me, and we used it in morning meeting, and it could be a fun way to engage kids if you're working with them online. And the second kind of introduction piece that I want to do, that I would normally do if we were in person, we would do this with index cards and we would be walking around the room. So we're doing the chat version today. I'm going to put a question into the chat and I want you to answer with only yes or no. And we'll do a few of these, and then I want you to be thinking about kind of how this feels and what you think of this experience after the fact. All right, so those are just a few questions. What are you thinking as you do this and get these answers from people, either a yes or a no to your question? And you can turn your mic on and speak, or you can put it in the chat if you'd rather share out that way.
It was a little impersonal because we couldn't see who was speaking and or hear them.
Right. Yes, I was definitely doing it very fast. Anything else?
I didn't really feel like I learned much about the group because it did go so fast to end. It wasn't graphed or anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, no, do you feel like if you just could answer these questions with a yes or no, and imagine if you were doing this in person and you said yes or no, you move, like passed your index card to that person and then they walked off to someone else to do the same question or to ask a different question to someone else, kind of like you didn't learn a lot about them, what would you be left? How would you feel? Or what would you want to know?
Well, I would feel like it would, if the goal is to get to know the people around you, I would kind of feel like it would be a waste of time.
Mm-hmm. How would you get to know someone better?
interacting with them.
Right. More time and attention. Yes.
Mhm.
So thinking about, if we think about this question that we just asked, and you could only respond with a yes or no, thinking about that in regards to looking at data. And if we only take that example, yes, Robin, the questions definitely involve more than a yes or no. So if we're taking a look at student data, we want to look at it more than yes, they got it, no, they didn't. We really want to take a look at that data, just like you might have follow-up questions of like, oh, someone here lived in another country. I want to know, where did they live? When did they live there? I would want to have engage in that deeper conversation to get to know people more versus just yes or no, and then that's all you look at. So that is a good activity to think about in regards to when you're looking at the data, really looking at what are the students doing and what knowledge are they bringing and what information can you build from. So let me put this up here. So today, our goals are to review the high leverage concept maps, to have some time to sort and plan using student work samples, and see how the high leverage concepts and high leverage assessments can be used to plan and differentiate interventions, both in the classroom or out of the classroom. And it seems like we have a good mix today of people who would be looking for ways to support students in the classroom, and some people who might have opportunities and the need to support students outside of the classroom. So we will go over a little bit of both today. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with or have used the high leverage concepts before with All Learners Network. So if you have used them before, just give me a thumbs up or an emoji or some reaction so I can see. So it seems like most of you have seen them at least. Thank you. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the 2-minute version of what they are really looking at what's most essential for students, all students to master before they leave a grade level, so that they can access the math at the next year's grade level. So it's really what's the most essential piece of learning, knowing that you're still teaching all the Common Core standards, you still have a lot of instruction that would go beyond the high leverage concepts, but that your time and your intervention and your guarantee of what you're gonna say every kid in this class is gonna walk away with are going to be narrowed down, and we've mapped them out with the high leverage concepts. So in your group, hopefully you can get to the PowerPoint, and if you're having trouble with that, let me know. But in your small groups, we're going to go to a breakout, and you can go to the website, the All Learners website, and kind of think about these what do you notice and what do you wonder questions. And if you've used the high leverage concept map before, definitely you can get into some of the conversations around how you might use them. So the link here should take you right to the website, and then you can choose which grade level span you prefer to look at. There's a pre-K 2 map, 3 to 5, and then a middle school map as well. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute. Are there any questions before I have you go into breakout rooms? Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what we're doing in the breakout rooms? Are we just exploring the website or together, or
Yep.
Is there any other?
Nope. So just exploring those high leverage maps, any or all of the grade levels, and thinking about noticings or wonderings that you might have. And if you get to the point where you have enough time to get to it, depending on how familiar with people in your group are with the high leverage concept maps, you might get to a point where you could talk about how you might use them as well. There were some really good conversations in the groups, and some questions came up around the models that are on the map. So if anyone else, maybe this is new to them. So we have the high leverage concepts, and then we have models for instruction where we've outlined a lot of the really common tools, manipulatives, models that students see during first instruction in the classroom. And then you'll notice there's the models for intervention, which is a narrowed down list of those models. And the reason that we have narrowed down the intervention models is that from experience in working with many children, we found, number one, that those students who are having struggles or have strong misconceptions or maybe haven't mastered a visual model yet, really narrowing their focus onto one or two can help them as opposed to trying to learn a lot of different tools. Not that they wouldn't be exposed to them in the classroom, but if you're thinking about providing intervention to them, just like you want to target their specific learning, you want to target a model that would be most helpful and most supportive of them building that conceptual understanding. So that's sort of how that section came about. And just as the critical areas and critical strategies are sort of, if you're thinking big picture, what are the most essential pieces that students need in order to build that understanding? And an easy example for that is in multiplication. If you think about learning your ones, twos, fives, and tens facts, that you can take other numbers and break them down and decompose them into ones, twos, fives, and tens facts, so that students who can't memorize all of them, and we don't want them to just memorize them without any understanding, that if they can really understand those and they have built their understanding of numbers and composing and decomposing, that they can then apply that if they have those facts really secure. So hopefully that helps kind of give a little more insight into the maps. And so along with the high leverage concepts, we have some high leverage assessments for each grade level, which are also up on the website. And I just want to take a minute here to kind of think about how those tools can be used to support instruction. So at the tier 1 level, if you think about, or if your school's using the high leverage assessments, the original design of them was made with providing the assessment 3 times throughout the year. And we had a lot of conversations around keeping it the same, changing the questions, and we landed on keeping it the same as a way to give some good progress monitoring and watch for student growth, as well as looking at how they are building their understanding and how that changes throughout the year. And then we have, oops, I did not mean to go ahead. If we give it in October, thinking about that's kind of your baseline. In January, you're checking on that growth. And then if you give it again in April, as opposed to waiting to do the assessment again in June, you have that whole end of the year to really focus heavily on interventions that need to still get done for students, as opposed to doing it as like you're doing it in June and you're kind of just noting what they haven't mastered yet, but you push that assessment up a little bit. You have that window to really do some more targeted interventions as needed. So at tier 1, thinking about working with teachers and doing some student work sorts, that's a great tool to do if you have student work from your own class to do with a teacher, or even just in intervention or small group, to really take some time to look at the student work and think about what strategies they're using, what information you can see and what evidence you see in their work that helps to connect to what they're learning. Great question. So as far as progress monitoring, I think there's so much that you can do with that. I have used the high leverage assessments. I did that with the entire kindergarten grade level, because I really wanted something, and I didn't want to miss students who would get to first grade and I would be working with them and they didn't have one-to-one consistently. So I think that's an opportunity. I've used the PNOA, I've used the Advantage from Math Recovery. But I also think that there's good value to questions and just looking at the student work that comes up from tasks assigned in the class, as well as assessments that go with whatever program or units your school has designed. And I think for progress monitoring, you can get tools in all of those different places. But the important thing to keep in mind is when you're doing intervention, especially when you move into tiers 2 and 3, that you're going to want to be progress monitoring at least every 2 weeks, if not more frequently. And I think in order to make that manageable is that what's helped me over the years is when I made my goal even smaller, then you can really target that and keep that progress monitoring going. And it doesn't feel so overwhelming. Like you're not trying to give a unit test that's covering that many topics every couple of weeks, but you're taking that one piece that you're just working on, the one-to-one counting with this group of students or student, and progress monitoring that. And some of those things that are like number ID or operations or strategies, then I would really just use even like a checklist of like how far they're counting or what size collections they're consistently doing. I think you could take the high leverage assessments and use them in different ways. It kind of depends. I would say if you're just like with anything, if there's a decision at the school level that's like your progress monitoring throughout the year, I wouldn't keep coming back to it. But in our district, it hasn't been used that way. So for example, this year, there was a group of first grade teachers were noticing that some of their kids were still not consistently counting. So we pulled a couple of the questions from the kindergarten high leverage assessment, and they just did those tasks with them. So I think as long as it's not something that's used systematically, that it's okay to take it and use it in a different way for your school. But I wouldn't want to do that with anything. Just like if your school uses the PNOA systematically, I wouldn't use it in between. Our school district doesn't, so we can have a little more flexibility with when we use it or how we use pieces of it. Does that help? I appreciate the questions. So then thinking about once you take a deep look at that student work and kind of move beyond that surface, yes, they get it, no, they didn't, but really look at what they're bringing to it. Then you can plan your differentiation and finding a way to have menus, activities, and really basing that on what students are doing can really help make that differentiation more manageable in the classroom. And then that progress monitoring piece. This I think I already just said. And really providing the learning opportunities and questions to build conceptual understanding. I'm sure you've all really thought about this before, but what you choose to present or the questions you ask or the tasks you give really are important. I was with a group last night actually, and we were talking about how really more important than a student doing a page of 25 problems is really working through with solid understanding and allowing them that time that they need to get through maybe 2 or 3 problems. But that learning and that growth that can happen with that deeper conceptual understanding is so much more valuable than the quantity of problems that they're getting to. So I think making sure that we give ourselves that permission to stop and think about like, what task are we putting in front of them, and being intentional with that really can help. So before we jump in any further, we're going to go back to breakout rooms. I'm going to have you open up the sorting student work is a live link in your presentation. And I want you in the groups to look at the student work. And I want you to pay attention. What is the student demonstrating? And this is good practice because you don't know these students. So this is the easiest time to sort work because you're not bringing any background knowledge and you only have the evidence that's there, which I think sometimes is good for us to step back and say, I don't want to bring my knowledge about Johnny to this conversation or what I think he can do, that I'm only looking at what the evidence is that the student has on this paper. There might be a pile, actually, I'm not going to say might be, there is always a pile that you have that you want to go back to and need more information. So that always comes up in a student work sort, which is expected. But thinking about what strategies are they doing and how you can start to group the students together based on similar strategies. And just like our yes and no question we started with, it shouldn't be a pile of they got it, they didn't get it. There are often, when you sort students' work, a group of students that are all using base 10 pieces, for example, and they're drawing them out. And that group may include students with the correct answer and students with incorrect answers, but the strategy that they're doing and the next instructional move that you want to make might be the same regardless of the answer. So are there any questions before I send you to the breakout rooms? Your task is to sort them as a group. It should ask you to make a copy if my link has worked correctly. And I'll give you guys about 15 or 20 minutes because after you sort the work, thinking about the strategy, then you can start to have conversations around what are next steps that you would do with these students. And hopefully some of this process either can be brought back to your own students or some of these ideas themselves can help. And you can think about going back to the map when you get to that next step process. Again, I think I got to more groups this time, so that was a success. And there were some really great conversations. People talking about number talks, a couple of groups it came up that how important it is for students to really make sense and understand the context and the problem. Otherwise, you end up with students who just pull out numbers and do some sort of calculation and it doesn't connect at all to what the situation is. So some really good conversations there. Any other highlights or questions that people want to bring up to the group here?
It was interesting to look at the different strategies and models that were being used and how they were being used, because in some cases we wondered if they were drawing a model of the numbers that they wrote down as to follow the direction of draw a model of your thinking, but they actually just drew models of the numbers that they used. Or if they used a number line, they may have used it correctly, but didn't know where the answer was, that type of thing. So those are instances that I would want to get more information.
Mm-hmm. I think that was another common theme of, did they write the equation first and then draw something because they felt like they had to? And what was their real thinking is sometimes hard to figure out and find out, especially if you're just looking at student work and don't have them there to ask those follow-up questions. So that's why I said you always end up with a questions pile when you're doing a work sort and have things that you want to go back and check in with some students on, for sure. And it came up in one of the groups that I think is worth mentioning to everybody. There's not really a right or wrong spot of where you could put the students or how you group them. It's more about the process. It's kind of getting deeper beyond they got the answer, they didn't, but really looking at what's there and how do you move them to their next spot. One of the groups was having a really good conversation about a student who solved it by counting up by ones. And they were talking about like the next step for this student might be getting them to make jumps of 10 and seeing that connection there. So anytime you can have students learn from each other and have them put up some of these work samples and have them make connections of what's the same and what's different, that will help push their thinking more than almost anything that you could do or say to them. Is really what they get from each other is much more powerful. So as we close out our time together, I want to highlight a few sample planning sheets that I've used with teachers after doing some work sorts and just some examples of how this could be used. So in one group where we were looking at counting objects and using that high leverage assessment, we planned out what are some stations, what would that look like for kids? And then we had groups of kids, those kids that still need within 20 would be checking in with the teacher 2 or 3 times a week. It doesn't have to be, I think the less we can focus on like how long they have to be with the teacher, but really focusing on what are they doing with the teacher is much more important. A task like counting, rote counting, or even one-to-one counting could be a 5 to 10 minute check-in with a student. It's not like you need to carve out a whole half hour to get that intervention piece done. And this could be done during a time if you have menus set up in your classroom, so that you have that opportunities for students to be individually practicing while you can check in with small groups or individuals that need it. And then we planned out like those stations for independence that can count with one-to-one. Maybe they're counting larger collections. They're including one more and one less into their stations. So really thinking about how you can use what you learn from student work in planning what's just right for them. Let's see, let's go back. So here's a first grade sort sheet. Sometimes we just take and we look at what are the strategies that are shown, and we group together the kids who are using manipulatives. Maybe they're going to move away from the number racks and move into 10 frames and work on really visualizing that 10 frame. The importance of kids getting that mental picture in their head and being able to see something is so important. You don't want them to be jumping to that abstract too quickly if they don't really have that ownership there. There were a group of students that we found had no strategy, no apparent strategy that we could make any sense of. So their next step was really getting interviewed of like, show me this with a drawing or use these 10 frames or blocks. Because if you might not have enough information to plan your next step. So you might have follow-up groups. There was a group of first graders given the task that we're counting on. So then we thought about how could we move them, similar actually to what one of the groups here said, like using problems where they're adding 10 and making that connection to place value, so that they're not just simply doing by ones anymore. So these are some examples of how you might use work sorts and plan different activities. Here's a sample document that our district uses, Bridges. So I took Bridges interventions, Bridges workplaces, and started to categorize them and sort them by the high leverage concepts and kind of connect them to where they're taught. It is very much an incomplete work in progress document, but it is a start. And I've also started to link in some other resources that I would commonly use. So that is a sample thing that's in there. It is honestly not complete, but it's there. And hopefully will help or provide a little bit of help. It's just a working draft, I guess. So then thinking about tier 2 instruction, how can you plan extra support for those grade level pieces that students need? And I know different school, like some people have an intervention time, some people do it within their math block when they have menu or workplaces. Some people have pull-out systems, but I think the more that we can make it connected to what is most essential at the grade level, and really aligning it to the targeted areas that the student needs, as opposed to more kind of blanket, like they need all of this, but really targeting what they need. And hopefully the high leverage concepts, if you haven't used them, might be a new tool to help you with that work. And really coordinating with the classroom teacher. There were a lot of times I would work with teachers and they would be doing their tier 1 instruction, but I would know sort of what was happening in the classroom. So even if I was doing something that wasn't directly in that unit, that I could make that connection, or I was doing something that would be like a prerequisite skill to support them learning that, and using the same tools that they're using in the classroom to have that connection. Then I want to make sure we get to very similarly for tier 3, thinking about using the high leverage concepts can help you make your IEP goals. They are grade level content standards, so it is really just narrowing down that focus. And I mentioned to some of you, there are more opportunities with the All Learners Network to take some workshops and courses online. You can find more information on them, but there's a whole specialized instruction one that Glenn Patterson and I teach. And we had a great group last night and some great conversations. And in that you have some specific time to take high leverage concepts, the essential elements, and think about how to plan and craft IEP goals for your students. So just know that today you're kind of getting little snippets of everything, but definitely check back. There are more opportunities and more resources on the website for you. And again, the importance for tier 3 to make sure that that connection happens between the classroom teacher and that coordination. And before we leave, I wanted to make sure I left some time for you if you have questions, comments, thoughts before we leave today.
I really love the document that you started, the working document where you've taken the high leverage concepts and linked in the Bridges intervention and Bridges at games and stuff. That is huge. Really huge. Thank you for sharing that.
You are welcome. And I will, as I continue to work on it, I will definitely, I don't know where it's going to land, but we'll figure out some way to maybe get the other grade levels or updates, at least to those of you who are here today. But hopefully, I figure if I'm doing the work on something, we might as well all collaborate and share our resources.
I thoroughly liked that same idea, Erica. We're constantly trying to figure out how to coordinate a pretty large team. And so my thought when you showed that part was to develop one. We do not use Bridges, but we could use that framework and apply it with our curriculum. And I want to thank you because I think my team will be super excited about that.
Oh, you're welcome.
I also really liked the planning, the intentionality behind analyzing student strategies and grouping them accordingly based on where they need to go next and where they're at. So, because it really focuses on building on students' strengths and identifying where they are in their thinking. Even if they're already thinking ahead, this is an example of what they felt confident sharing, because typically students will only record their thinking in ways that they are confident they're going to get it right, or that they're most comfortable with. So I really loved that intentional planning. It's not something that I've seen in a lot of places. I've heard of it and seen it, but not
Yes.
enough.
Yes. And I think like that deficit thought or that deficit approach is, I don't like, it just comes easier maybe, I don't know. But I think that if we can make that shift, that helps make that growth mindset shift for our students more. If we can be more intentional and conscious of how we're looking at it too. And some of you, I know we're kind of at our end time, but some of you were in the session with Ashley and I earlier. We have other resources that are coming out, so definitely check back as things get updated. They keep getting added to the website. And please reach out if you have any questions at any time. There's a discussion board on our website that you can reach out, or you can send an email to us, and it will get to one of us if you have a question specific to one of your presentations from today. But thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you're walking away with something new to think about.